The heavy oak doors of Courtroom 303 did not merely close. They slammed shut with a finality that carried the accumulated weight of generations of quiet prejudice, the kind that settles into the bones of a place until the building itself seems complicit. Deputy Cole Brennan smirked as he adjusted his utility belt, the leather creaking under his thick fingers. He had just shoved a quiet, unassuming black woman out into the corridor as if she were nothing more than refuse. In his mind, he had cleaned the courtroom, swept away the usual riffraff that cluttered the galleries of the Monroe County Courthouse in Foresight, Georgia. What Brennan did not know, what he could not possibly have imagined, was that the woman he had just humiliated was the apex predator of the entire system he believed he controlled. The Monroe County Courthouse rose from the red Georgia clay like a relic of another century, a sprawling monolith of gray limestone and Corinthian columns deliberately designed to make ordinary citizens feel small. The air inside smelled of industrial floor wax, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of institutional despair that never quite washed away. For more than 100 years, the building had served as the final arbiter of fate for the people of the county. On this particular morning, however, the building itself was about to be judged. Honorable Beatrice Langford stepped through the revolving glass doors at exactly 8:17 a.m. She possessed a quiet gravitational pull that drew the eye even when she did nothing to invite attention. In her early 50s, Beatrice had spent decades climbing the jagged cliffs of the American justice system, first as a scrappy public defender in the hardest wards of Chicago, then as a relentless federal prosecutor, and finally as a justice on the state appellate courts. Only 2 weeks earlier, the governor had appointed her chief judge of the state Supreme Court, the first black woman ever to hold the position. Yet this morning there were no cameras, no security detail, no flowing black robes to announce her authority. She wore a simple camel-colored trench coat over a muted navy turtleneck and tailored slacks. Tortoiseshell reading glasses hung from a thin silver chain around her neck. Her hair was pulled back into a practical, no-nonsense bun. The worn leather satchel she carried had seen more courtrooms than most attorneys would enter in a lifetime. She was here on a ghost mission. For years, quiet reports had leaked out of Monroe County. Blatant civil rights violations, wildly disproportionate sentencing, a toxic good old boy culture that thrived under the stagnant leadership of the local presiding magistrate, Judge Caldwell. Beatrice was no politician. She was a tactician. She understood that if she announced her arrival, the courthouse would stage a pristine, sanitized performance. To see the rot, she had to walk among it in the dark. She cleared the metal detectors with the weary anonymity of any ordinary citizen. The young security guard barely glanced at her, more absorbed in his phone than in the woman passing through. She navigated the echoing marble hallways, following the brass plaques, until she found Courtroom 302. Judge Caldwell's domain. Slipping through the heavy double doors, she took a seat in the very last row of the gallery. The wooden pews were deliberately uncomfortable, built to keep spectators awake and acutely aware of their subordination to the bench. She unlatched her satchel, withdrew a simple yellow legal pad and a silver fountain pen, and crossed her legs. The courtroom was sparsely populated. A handful of exhausted public defenders shuffled papers at the front tables, looking as though they were drowning in case files. In the jury box sat a row of defendants waiting for arraignments or minor hearings, mostly young men of color, their faces tight with anxiety. At the front of the room, perched high on his mahogany throne, sat Judge Caldwell. He looked as though he had been born in a country club, silver hair perfectly parted, cheeks flushed with the broken capillaries of a man who enjoyed expensive scotch. He spoke with a lazy, booming drawl, dispensing life-altering decisions with the casual indifference of someone ordering lunch. Standing off to the side, leaning against the wood-paneled wall with his thumbs hooked in his duty belt, was Deputy Cole Brennan. Brennan was a stocky, square-jawed man in his late 30s. His uniform was pressed so sharply, it looked as though it could cut glass. He chewed a piece of gum with slow, deliberate rhythm, his eyes scanning the gallery like a predator searching for a weak stray. Beatrice began to take notes. She watched Caldwell rush through 3 cases in less than 15 minutes. He denied bail to a young black father arrested for a minor traffic violation and a single missed court date, setting the bond at an absurd $10,000. When the overwhelmed public defender tried to cite a recent state Supreme Court precedent on bail reform, Caldwell waved a dismissive hand. "Save the law school lecture, counselor," he scoffed, adjusting his microphone. "In my courtroom, if you don't respect the law enough to show up, you pay for the privilege of leaving. Next case." Beatrice's pen scratched quietly across the paper. Flagrant disregard for State versus Harrison. Judicial temperament hostile. Bail protocols arbitrary and punitive. It was the kind of systemic negligence she had dedicated her life to dismantling. She watched as another defendant, a 19-year-old named Jamal Jenkins, was brought before the podium. Jamal looked terrified. He stood accused of loitering and resisting arrest, charges so notoriously flimsy they practically screamed profiling. As Jamal's lawyer tried to speak, Beatrice felt a prickle of awareness on the back of her neck, a survival instinct honed over decades. She slowly lifted her eyes from the notepad. Deputy Cole Brennan had stopped scanning the room. His gaze was locked dead on her. Brennan pushed himself off the wall. He did not like the look of the woman in the back row. She was too quiet, too still. The way she wrote in that yellow pad bothered him. In Brennan's mind, a courtroom was his personal territory. The people who sat in the gallery were supposed to look scared, intimidated, or desperate. Mothers crying over delinquent sons, girlfriends waiting to pay fines. They were not supposed to look analytical, and they certainly were not supposed to be black women taking notes as if they were evaluating him. He began the slow walk down the center aisle. His heavy black boots struck the polished wooden floor with deliberate, intimidating thuds. Thud. Thud. He wanted her to hear him coming. He wanted her to feel the weight of his authority before he even opened his mouth. Beatrice did not look up. She continued writing, documenting a blatant procedural error Judge Caldwell had just made regarding Jamal's right to discovery. She knew exactly what Brennan was doing. It was a classic intimidation tactic, one she had watched play out in 100 different courtrooms across the country. Brennan stopped at the edge of her pew, his shadow falling across her legal pad. He stood too close, invading her personal space in a silent demand for submission. "Can I help you with something?" His voice was a low, gravelly sneer, dripping with the kind of condescension that immediately set Beatrice's teeth on edge. She finished the sentence she was writing, capped her silver pen with a soft click, and slowly looked up. She did not shrink back. She met his gaze with a terrifying calm. "No thank you, Deputy," she said softly, her voice smooth and modulated. "I'm perfectly fine." Brennan's jaw tightened. He was not used to eye contact like this. Usually when he approached someone in the gallery, they stammered, looked away, or immediately tried to explain themselves. This woman looked at him as though he were the one on trial. "You've been sitting here for an hour, scribbling away," he said, gesturing lazily toward her notepad. "Court is in session. Who are you here for? You Jamal's auntie or something?" The microaggression hung in the air, heavy and toxic. The automatic assumption that the only reason a black woman would be in a courthouse was because she was related to a criminal defendant. Beatrice felt a cold, familiar anger rise in her chest, but she kept her face completely impassive. "I am not here for Mr. Jenkins," she replied, her tone remaining perfectly level. "I am here observing the proceedings. This is a public courtroom, is it not?" Brennan let out a short, humorless laugh. He leaned closer, resting one hand on the butt of his taser. "Yeah, it's public, but it ain't a library, And it ain't a place for you to sit and play amateur reporter. We've got rules here. No recording, no distracting the court. I assure you, Deputy, I am not distracting the court, Beatrice said, holding her legal pad up slightly. I am merely taking notes. There is no statutory rule or local ordinance in Monroe County prohibiting a citizen from taking written notes in a public gallery. The legal terminology caused Brennan to blink. Statutory rule, local ordinance. For a second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes, but his ego quickly swallowed it. He decided she was simply repeating words she had heard on some television procedural. He hated people who thought they knew the law. Listen to me very carefully, he growled, dropping his voice so only she could hear. I don't care what you think you know. I'm the one who decides who sits in my gallery. You look like you're casing the room or preparing to cause a disruption. We've had enough trouble with activists and agitators lately. I'm going to ask you one time, put the pad away or step outside. Beatrice's eyes narrowed by a fraction of a millimeter. This was the moment, the exact point where an officer of the law chose to abandon his duty to serve and protect, and instead weaponized his badge to stroke his own prejudice. If she revealed who she was right now, he would immediately back down, apologize profusely, and blame a misunderstanding. He would survive to harass another citizen tomorrow. No, she needed him to commit. She needed to see exactly how far the rot went. Deputy, Beatrice said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the lethal authority of a judge who had sentenced mob bosses. Under the First and Sixth Amendments of the United States Constitution, the public has a fundamental right to attend and observe court proceedings unless the presiding judge has issued a specific, narrowly tailored order to seal this courtroom. You have no legal basis to ask me to leave, nor to demand I cease writing. Brennan's face flushed a deep, ugly red. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. Being spoken to like this, being educated by a black woman in front of a courtroom he considered his territory, was a direct assault on his fragile pride. All right, that's it, he snapped. You're done. He did not wait for Judge Caldwell to intervene. He did not issue another warning. He reached across the wooden pew and grabbed Beatrice roughly by the bicep. The physical contact was sudden and violent. Brennan's large, calloused hand clamped down on her arm with enough force to bruise. He yanked her upward, forcing her to her feet. Her legal pad tumbled to the floor, papers scattering across the dusty wood. "Hey!" Jamal Jenkins yelled from the front podium, breaking the silence of the courtroom. "She ain't doing nothing." "Shut your mouth, Jenkins, or I'll add contempt to your charges," Judge Caldwell barked, slamming his gavel down. He peered over his reading glasses at the commotion in the back. He saw his deputy manhandling a middle-aged black woman. He did not ask what the problem was. He did not ask for a legal justification. He simply sighed, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Deputy Brennan, if the spectator is causing a disturbance, remove her from my courtroom immediately," Caldwell ordered, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. "Yes, Your Honor," Brennan called back, his grip tightening on Beatrice's arm. Beatrice did not scream. She did not physically resist, knowing exactly how officers like Brennan escalated situations when given even a fraction of an excuse. But as he shoved her into the aisle, she turned her head and locked eyes with him. "Remove your hand from me," she said. It was not a request. It was a command that carried the absolute, chilling certainty of a woman who held the power to end his career with a single signature. Brennan laughed, a cruel, breathless sound. "Move it, lady. You're trespassing now." He shoved her from behind, forcing her to walk down the aisle. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence. The public defenders lowered their heads, too exhausted or too cowardly to intervene. The defendants in the jury box watched with a mixture of anger and resignation, recognizing the familiar choreography of systemic abuse. "You are making a catastrophic mistake, Deputy," Beatrice stated calmly as they reached the double doors. "You are acting under color of law to violate a citizen's civil rights. You are committing battery." "Keep talking, lawyer lady," Brennan sneered, shoving the heavy oak doors open with his shoulder. "Maybe I'll take you down to booking and let you explain the Constitution to the drunks in holding." With one final aggressive shove, he pushed Beatrice out of the courtroom and into the echoing marble corridor. She stumbled slightly, her sensible heels catching on the slick floor, but she quickly righted herself, smoothing out her trench coat with quiet dignity. Brennan stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance like a nightclub bouncer. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger at her face. "Don't let me catch you in this building again," he warned, his voice echoing down the empty hall. "People like you come in here thinking you own the place just because you read a Wikipedia article about your rights. This is my courthouse. You aren't welcome here. Take a walk." Without waiting for a response, he stepped back inside and pulled the heavy oak door shut. It slammed with a resounding final boom. Beatrice Langford stood alone in the hallway. Her bicep throbbed where the deputy's fingers had dug into her flesh. Her legal pad, containing pages of damning evidence against Caldwell's courtroom, was still on the floor inside. She took a slow, deep breath. The scent of floor wax and stale coffee suddenly smelled like impending justice. She reached into the pocket of her trench coat and pulled out her smartphone. She bypassed her contacts and dialed a number directly from memory. It rang twice before it was answered. "Langford," a sharp, professional voice answered. It was David Mercer, her chief of staff at the state Supreme Court. "David," Beatrice said, her voice stripped of the polite neutrality she had used in the courtroom. It was now razor-sharp, vibrating with purpose. "I'm at the Monroe County Courthouse in Foresight." "How's the ghost tour, Chief Judge?" David asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Is Caldwell as bad as the ACLU claims?" "Worse," Beatrice replied, turning to look at the closed doors of courtroom 302. "I was just physically assaulted and unlawfully ejected from the gallery by a deputy named Brennan. Judge Caldwell sanctioned the removal." There was dead silence on the other end of the line. When David finally spoke, the amusement was entirely gone, replaced by the ice-cold efficiency of a political operative going to war. "Are you injured, Your Honor? Do you need me to dispatch the state troopers?" "I am fine, David. Bruised, but fine," Beatrice said, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the brass plaque on the courtroom door. "But Deputy Brennan and Judge Caldwell are about to have a very bad day. Contact the governor's office. I want the superintendent of the state police, the head of the Judicial Conduct Commission, and the local district attorney on a conference call in exactly 20 minutes. "Consider it done, Your Honor. What are your orders?" A slow, dangerous smile finally broke across Beatrice's face. It was the smile of a predator who had just locked the cage from the inside. "David," she said softly, "bring me my robes." 10 minutes after being physically ejected from courtroom 302, Beatrice Langford sat in the cavernous back seat of an unmarked black Chevrolet Suburban. The SUV had been discreetly parked in the loading dock alley behind the Monroe County Courthouse, engine idling, its heavily tinted windows shielding her from the morning sun. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady note, a stark contrast to the boiling heat of injustice she had just experienced. She held a cold bottle of water against her right bicep. A deep purplish bruise was already beginning to bloom against her skin in the exact shape of Deputy Brennan's thick fingers. The secure encrypted satellite phone mounted in the center console chimed. Beatrice pressed the speaker button. "Chief Judge Langford." "Your Honor, we are all on the line," David's voice crackled through the speaker. "You have Colonel James Harlan of the State Police, Eleanor Prescott from the Judicial Conduct Commission, and Thomas Harrington, the District Attorney for Monroe County." "Good morning, everyone," Beatrice said. "I apologize for the short notice, but we have a constitutional crisis unfolding in the third-floor gallery of the Monroe County Courthouse, and I intend to extinguish it before lunch. Chief Judge, D.A. Thomas Harrington stammered, his voice tight with nervous energy. He was a career politician who had built a comfortable life, ignoring the systemic rot in his own backyard. I was just briefed by your chief of staff. I am absolutely appalled. If one of our deputies laid a hand on you, Stop right there, Mr. Harrington, Beatrice cut him off, her tone sharp enough to slice through steel. Do not frame this as a tragedy because of who I am. Frame this as a tragedy because of what he did. Deputy Brennan did not assault the chief judge of the state Supreme Court. He assaulted an anonymous black woman who was quietly exercising her First and Sixth Amendment rights. He did so with the explicit verbal authorization of Judge Caldwell. If they are comfortable doing this to me in an open gallery, I shudder to think what they are doing to the young men in holding. There was a heavy, uncomfortable silence on the line. Eleanor Prescott, a legendary litigator who had spent 20 years hunting corrupt judges, cleared her throat. Beatrice, she said, dropping the formal titles given their long history. What exactly do you need from the commission? We can fast-track an ethics investigation. We can have Caldwell suspended with pay by tomorrow morning. No, Beatrice replied instantly. Suspended with pay gives him time to shred documents, intimidate the court reporters, and coordinate his story with the deputies. I am invoking my administrative authority under Article 6, Section 4 of the state constitution. I am taking immediate receivership of Courtroom 302. I need you to draft the emergency writ of mandamus, Eleanor. Have it signed and emailed to David within the hour. Caldwell is done. Consider it drafted, Eleanor said grimly. Colonel Harlan, Beatrice shifted her focus to the state police superintendent. I'm here, Your Honor, the gruff veteran lawman replied. I need a tactical escort, not a parade, Colonel, a surgical strike. I need 4 of your most professional, unshakable troopers to meet me at the loading dock. We are going to walk into Courtroom 302, and we are going to secure the premises. I want the local bailiffs disarmed and relieved of duty the moment we breach the doors. You want state troopers to disarm county deputies inside an active courtroom? Harlan asked, a hint of genuine shock in his voice. Your Honor, with all due respect, that is going to cause a massive jurisdictional standoff. The local sheriff is going to have a heart attack. Let him, Beatrice countered. I was physically battered under color of law. Deputy Brennan committed a felony under Title 18, U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. He is an active threat to the public. If the local sheriff has an issue with the state police securing a crime scene, he can take it up with the Department of Justice. Can you execute the order, Colonel? Yes, ma'am. I have a rapid response unit 3 blocks away. They will be at your location in 5 minutes. Excellent. Mr. Harrington, Beatrice said, turning her verbal crosshairs back to the district attorney. I suggest you get down to the courthouse immediately, because when I take the bench, I am going to order a full review of every single case Judge Caldwell has touched this year. Every plea deal forced under duress, every unconstitutional bail amount. If I find that your prosecutors were complicit in this conveyor belt of civil rights violations, I will not hesitate to refer your entire office to the federal authorities. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Your Honor. Harrington swallowed hard. Good. End call. Beatrice tapped the console, plunging the SUV back into silence. She leaned her head against the leather headrest and closed her eyes. Her arm throbbed, a steady reminder of the physical reality of the violence woven into the justice system. For decades, she had read appellate briefs about police brutality, courtroom bias, and judicial misconduct. But reading about it was one thing. Feeling the bruising grip of a racist deputy was another. It fueled a righteous, unyielding fire in her chest. A sharp knock on the tinted glass pulled her from her thoughts. She unlocked the door. David Mercer stood in the alleyway, a sharp-featured man in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a heavy black canvas garment bag. Behind him, two marked state police cruisers pulled quietly into the alley, their light bars dark, tires crunching over the loose gravel. Four towering state troopers clad in crisp olive uniforms, tactical vests, and wide-brimmed campaign hats stepped out. They moved with military precision, their faces locked in expressions of absolute resolve. David opened the back door of the Suburban and carefully unzipped the garment bag. Inside, suspended on a wooden hanger, was her judicial robe, heavy matte black silk, a garment designed not for vanity, but for the solemn weight of the law. "The writ from the commission is in your inbox, Your Honor," David said quietly, offering her a pristine white collar to wear beneath the robe. "Colonel Harlan's men are briefed and ready. The local sheriff's office has not been alerted. We have total surprise." Beatrice stepped out of the SUV. The oppressive Georgia summer heat immediately wrapped around her, but she did not flinch. She slipped her arms into the flowing black sleeves of the robe. As David adjusted the collar and zipped the front, the transformation was absolute. She was no longer an anonymous citizen in a trench coat. She was the physical embodiment of the highest court in the state. "How is your arm?" David asked, noticing the way she held her right shoulder slightly stiff. "It serves as a wonderful reminder, David," Beatrice said, her eyes flashing with a terrifying clarity, "of exactly why we are here." She turned to face the four state troopers. The ranking sergeant, a decorated veteran named Sergeant Miller, ironically sharing a surname with nothing of her attacker's character, snapped a crisp salute. "Lead the way, Sergeant," Beatrice ordered. "It's time to hold court." Up in courtroom 302, the atmosphere was suffocatingly routine. The brief interruption caused by the disruptive woman had been entirely forgotten by Judge Caldwell. For him, throwing people out of the gallery was simply part of courtroom management, a necessary pesticide to keep the vermin at bay. Caldwell was currently berating a young public defender who had dared to request a continuance for Jamal Jenkins. "I am sick and tired of these delay tactics, counselor," Caldwell boomed into his microphone, tapping his gold pen against the mahogany bench. "Mr. Jenkins was caught loitering. He resisted a lawful order. We don't need a month of discovery to look at body cam footage. I'm setting this for trial next week, and bail remains at $5,000. "Your Honor, my client cannot afford $5,000, the exhausted defender pleaded, wiping sweat from her forehead. "He will lose his job at the auto shop if he sits in county lockup for a week. Then he should have thought of his employment before he decided to treat the streets like his personal playground," Caldwell sneered, looking entirely bored. "Next case." Over by the wood-paneled wall, Deputy Cole Brennan chuckled. He loved watching Caldwell work. They understood each other perfectly. They were the gatekeepers. Brennan adjusted his duty belt, feeling a surge of adrenaline from his physical altercation earlier. The way he had manhandled that black woman, it felt good to remind people who was in charge. She had tried to throw fancy legal words at him, but in the end, physics and authority won. They always did. He popped a fresh piece of gum into his mouth, scanning the terrified faces of the defendants in the jury box. "Nobody speaks up," Brennan thought proudly, "because they know I'll drag them out by their necks too." Outside in the hallway, the heavy rhythmic thud of combat boots echoed against the marble. It was not the slow, lazy walk of a county deputy. It was a synchronized, unified march. Brennan frowned, stepping away from the wall. He rested his hand on his taser, staring at the closed double doors at the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors did not simply open. They were thrust apart with explosive, synchronized force. They slammed against the interior walls with a sound like a thunderclap, echoing violently through the high-ceilinged room. Every head in the courtroom whipped around. Two state troopers marched in, their faces carved from stone, their hands resting firmly on their duty belts. They immediately flanked the doors, creating a secure perimeter. 2 more troopers followed, marching straight down the center aisle. "What in the hell is the meaning of this?" Judge Caldwell barked, half rising from his leather chair. "Troopers, you are interrupting an active session. Who authorized you to—" "All rise," a sharp, booming voice commanded from the back of the room. It was David Mercer, stepping through the doorway with the unyielding posture of an executioner. "All rise for the Honorable Beatrice Langford, Chief Judge of the State Supreme Court." The courtroom froze. The air was sucked entirely out of the room. The public defenders practically leaped to their feet. The court reporter stopped typing, her hands hovering, trembling, over the keys. From the shadows of the hallway, Beatrice Langford emerged. She was fully robed in black silk, moving with a terrifying silent grace. In her left hand, she carried the crumpled yellow legal pad she had been forced to leave on the floor an hour earlier. Deputy Cole Brennan stopped chewing his gum, his jaw locked. His heart, which had been beating with arrogant rhythm just moments ago, suddenly dropped into his stomach. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. It was her, the woman he had shoved, the woman he had bruised, the woman he had threatened to throw in the drunk tank, Chief Judge of the State Supreme Court. "No," Brennan whispered out loud, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror escaping his lips. "No, no, no." Beatrice walked down the center aisle. She did not rush. She did not look at the defendants nor the lawyers. She kept her eyes locked entirely on Judge Reed Caldwell, who was now gripping the edges of his mahogany bench so tightly his knuckles were white. The red flush of expensive scotch had vanished from his cheeks, replaced by the pale, clammy sheen of a man watching a meteor hurtle toward his house. Beatrice bypassed the gallery entirely. She walked through the swinging wooden gate that separated the spectators from the well of the court. She walked past the defense tables, past the prosecutor's podium, and climbed the 3 carpeted steps leading up to the judge's bench. Caldwell was paralyzed. He didn't know whether to sit, stand, or offer his chair. "Chief Judge Langford," he stammered, his voice trembling violently. We had no idea you were visiting Monroe County. If you had called ahead, we would have prepared a proper reception." "Get out of my chair, Reed," Beatrice said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the chilling, inescapable weight of an avalanche. Caldwell swallowed hard, practically tripping over his own robe as he scrambled out of the high-backed leather chair. Beatrice took her seat. She placed her yellow legal pad on the polished wood, smoothing out the crumpled pages. She looked out over the silent, terrified courtroom. Then she turned her terrifying gaze toward the wood-paneled wall. Deputy Cole Brennan was trying to make himself invisible. He was pressed against the wall, his hands sweating profusely. He felt the eyes of the 4 state troopers locking onto him, reading the situation. "Deputy Brennan," Beatrice said. Her voice echoed through the microphone, filling every corner of the room. "Yes, Your Honor," Brennan choked out. His vocal cords felt like sandpaper. "An hour ago, you informed me that this was your courtroom," Beatrice said calmly, picking up her silver fountain pen. "You informed me that I was not welcome here. You placed your hands on me, committed an unprovoked battery, and physically threw me into the hallway." Gasps erupted from the public defender's table. The young lawyer representing Jamal Jenkins covered her mouth in absolute shock. The defendants in the jury box stared at Beatrice with wide, disbelieving eyes. The woman they had watched get bullied was the boss of the entire system. "Your Honor, I didn't know," Brennan pleaded, taking a hesitant step forward, his hands raised in surrender. "I thought you were you didn't identify yourself. I was just following standard security protocols." "Standard security protocols," Beatrice repeated, her voice dripping with lethal precision. "Tell me, Deputy, do your standard protocols dictate that you assault black women who sit quietly taking notes? Do your protocols dictate that you deny citizens their constitutional right to observe a public hearing?" "Your Honor, please." "It was a misunderstanding," Brennan begged, his voice cracking. The tough, swaggering bully had evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified man. "It was not a misunderstanding, Mr. Brennan. It was a revelation," Beatrice stated, her eyes flashing with righteous fury. "It was a perfect, unvarnished look at how you operate when you think no one of consequence is watching. But I was watching." She turned her attention to the senior state trooper standing in the center aisle. "Sergeant," Beatrice commanded. "Yes, Chief Judge," the trooper responded, stepping sharply forward. "Deputy Cole Brennan is stripped of his authority as an officer of the court, effective immediately," Beatrice ordered, her voice echoing with the finality of a gavel strike. "You are to place him under arrest for battery, assault, and the deprivation of civil rights under color of law." Brennan's knees buckled. "No, Judge Caldwell, do something. Tell them—" Caldwell looked away, staring fixedly at the floor, abandoning his attack dog the second his own survival was threatened. Two state troopers advanced on Brennan. They didn't ask him to turn around. They grabbed him by the arms, the exact same way he had grabbed Beatrice, and spun him roughly against the wood-paneled wall. The heavy metallic click-click of handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Brennan's wrists echoed loudly in the silent courtroom. "You have the right to remain silent," the trooper whispered harshly into Brennan's ear. "I highly suggest you use it." Beatrice watched as the man who had terrorized this courtroom was marched out in irons, his head bowed, his career utterly destroyed. But her work was far from over. She turned her cold, analytical gaze back to the man standing nervously beside the bench. "Now, Reed," Beatrice said softly, "let's talk about your docket." Judge Reed Caldwell stood awkwardly beside his own bench, a deposed king forced to watch his castle be repossessed. He wrung his manicured hands. The heavy gold Rolex on his wrist suddenly looked less like a symbol of status and more like a shackle of corruption. "Chief Judge Langford," Caldwell said, his voice dropping to a desperate, placating whisper. "I admit the deputy's actions were overzealous, but surely we can discuss this in my chambers. There is a decorum to be maintained, a professional courtesy between colleagues." Beatrice Langford did not look up from her legal pad. She reached for the tall stack of manila case files resting on the corner of the bench. "We are not colleagues, Reed," she replied, her voice ringing out clearly over the courtroom's microphone. "Colleagues share a mutual respect for the law. You view the law as a bludgeon to keep the marginalized in line while you tee off for your afternoon golf game. And as for decorum, you forfeited any right to that word the moment you allowed a citizen to be assaulted in your presence." She flipped open the top file. It was the case of Jamal Jenkins. "Will the assistant district attorney handling this docket please approach the podium?" Beatrice commanded. A young prosecutor, scarcely 3 years out of law school, practically sprinted down the aisle. His name tag read William Bradley. He was pale, sweating through his cheap suit, clutching his legal pad to his chest like a shield. "Yes, Chief Judge," Bradley stammered, gripping the wooden edges of the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. "Mr. Bradley," Beatrice said, peering over her tortoiseshell reading glasses, "I am reviewing the charges against Mr. Jamal Jenkins, loitering and resisting arrest. I see no underlying primary offense. I see no civilian complaint. The arresting officer's narrative claims Mr. Jenkins looked suspicious outside of a convenience store. Explain to me the evidentiary basis for a $5,000 cash bond." Bradley swallowed hard, looking desperately at Caldwell for help, but Caldwell was staring at the floor. "Your Honor, the state was relying on the arresting officer's assessment of flight risk," Bradley squeaked. "Flight risk." Beatrice arched an eyebrow, her tone laced with absolute incredulity. "Mr. Jenkins is 19 years old. He has no prior criminal record. He works full-time at a local auto repair shop, a job he will lose if he is held in custody. Setting a $5,000 bond for a non-violent, victimless misdemeanor is not a safeguard, Mr. Bradley. It is a ransom. It is a blatant violation of the Eighth Amendment prohibiting excessive bail. She picked up her silver fountain pen. The charges against Mr. Jenkins are entirely devoid of probable cause, Beatrice announced, her pen striking the paper with deliberate force. Case dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Jenkins, you are free to go. A stunned gasp ripped through the gallery. In the jury box, Jamal Jenkins buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with overwhelming relief. His public defender, the young woman who had been fighting a losing battle all morning, wiped a tear from her cheek. Before Caldwell could even process the dismissal, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open again. District Attorney Thomas Harrington burst into the room, flanked by two of his senior prosecutors. Harrington's face was flushed, his tie slightly askew. He had sprinted 2 blocks from his office the moment he received Beatrice's call. "Chief Judge Langford," Harrington called out, marching down the aisle with an affected air of righteous indignation. "I arrived as quickly as I could. I want to personally assure you that the district attorney's office had no knowledge of Deputy Brennan's abhorrent behavior today. We condemn it in the strongest possible terms." Beatrice leaned back in the high leather chair, watching the politician perform. It was a pathetic display of self-preservation. "Is that right, Mr. Harrington?" Beatrice asked coldly. "Because I have been sitting in the back of this courtroom for over an hour. I watched your assistant district attorneys stand by silently while Judge Caldwell systematically trampled the due process rights of half a dozen defendants. Your office didn't object to exorbitant bail. Your office did not object to unlawful discovery delays. You didn't condemn anything until your own career was placed in the crosshairs." Harrington stopped dead in his tracks, the political bluster knocked completely out of him. "Your Honor, Save it for the Judicial Conduct Commission," Beatrice cut him off sharply, "because they are already here." Right on cue, Eleanor Prescott strode into the courtroom. The legendary litigator and head of the commission looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. She carried a sleek black leather portfolio and was accompanied by 2 stern-looking agents from the State Attorney General's Anti-Corruption Task Force. Eleanor bypassed the defense tables and walked straight up to Reed Caldwell. She did not offer a polite greeting. She handed him a thick sealed document bearing the embossed gold seal of the state Supreme Court. "Reed Caldwell," Eleanor said, her voice echoing with decades of intolerance for dirty judges. "By the emergency administrative authority of the Chief Judge, and upon the execution of a writ of mandamus, you are hereby removed from your duties as presiding magistrate of Monroe County. You are stripped of your judicial immunity, pending a comprehensive state and federal investigation into civil rights abuses, arbitrary sentencing, and gross judicial misconduct." Caldwell took the document with trembling hands. His face, usually a mask of arrogant superiority, crumpled into genuine, pathetic despair. "Eleanor, please, 30 years. I've given 30 years to this county. And you have poisoned every single one of them," Eleanor replied coldly. "Take off the robe, Reed. You are a disgrace to the fabric." The silence in the courtroom was absolute as Caldwell's shaking hands reached for the zipper of his black silk robe. He pulled it down, slipping the heavy garment off his shoulders. Without it, he looked remarkably small. Just an old, prejudiced man in a wrinkled suit. "Escort Mr. Caldwell to his office to collect his personal effects," Beatrice instructed the 2 agents. "He is not to touch any computers, files, or state property. Then escort him off the premises." As Caldwell was marched down the aisle, completely humiliated, he passed Jamal Jenkins, who was standing outside the jury box, a free man. Caldwell couldn't even meet the young man's eyes. The door closed behind the disgraced judge, the heavy thud acting as a final punctuation mark on a reign of terror. Beatrice turned her attention to D.A. Thomas Harrington, who looked as though he was about to faint. "Mr. Harrington," Beatrice commanded, leaning forward, resting her forearms on the bench. I am placing Courtroom 302 under emergency state receivership. A visiting judge from the appellate division will arrive tomorrow morning to take over this docket. In the meantime, you and I are going to sit here right now and review every single plea deal, bail hearing, and sentencing document your office has submitted to this court over the last 6 months. Harrington gulped. Chief Judge, that's hundreds of files. It will take weeks. Then I suggest you order lunch for your staff, Beatrice replied, her gaze utterly unyielding. Because nobody is leaving this room until the scales of justice in Monroe County are balanced. Sit down. For the next 8 hours, Courtroom 302 was transformed from a slaughterhouse into an actual theater of justice. Beatrice Langford didn't take a break. She didn't leave the bench. With surgical precision and an encyclopedic knowledge of constitutional law, she ripped apart the corrupt machinery that Reed Caldwell and Cole Brennan had built. She summoned the public defenders forward one by one. Lawyers who had walked into the building that morning feeling defeated and burned out suddenly found themselves standing before a judge who actually listened. Cases built on illegal searches were tossed out. Misdemeanor charges specifically designed to stack fines on poor defendants were vacated. Young men and women who had been languishing in county jail simply because they couldn't afford Caldwell's draconian bail amounts were granted immediate release on their own recognizance. By 6:03 p.m., the atmosphere in the courtroom had entirely shifted. The oppressive weight of institutional despair was gone, replaced by the chaotic, beautiful hum of actual, functional democracy. Mothers in the gallery wept as they realized their sons were coming home. Public defenders furiously took notes, their faith in the system reignited by the woman in the black robe. When the final case file was closed, Beatrice neatly aligned the stack of papers on the bench. She took off her reading glasses, letting them hang by the silver chain around her neck. She looked out at the remaining occupants of the courtroom. The troopers were still standing guard. Eleanor Prescott was seated at the clerk's desk, cross-referencing files for the grand jury probe. D.A. Harrington was slumped in his chair, utterly exhausted and thoroughly humbled. Let today be a warning. Beatrice's voice resonated through the quiet room, carrying a profound emotional weight. And let it be a promise. The law is not a weapon to be wielded by the privileged against the vulnerable. It is a shield designed to protect the very people Reed Caldwell and Cole Brennan sought to crush. When you put on a badge, when you put on a suit to prosecute, you are making a sacred vow to the Constitution. If you betray that vow in my state, I will find you, and I will end your career. She stood up. Court is adjourned. 6 months later, the Monroe County Courthouse in Foresight looked the same from the outside, still a monolithic structure of gray limestone and Corinthian columns. But inside, the rot had been excised. The fallout from that single Friday morning had been catastrophic for the corrupt establishment. Following the Judicial Conduct Commission's investigation, Reed Caldwell was formally disbarred and indicted by a federal grand jury for extortion and civil rights violations. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division had descended on Monroe County, unearthing a decade-long conspiracy of kickbacks tied to private probation companies. Caldwell's legacy was reduced to a cautionary tale taught in ethics seminars. Former Deputy Cole Brennan didn't fare much better. The body camera footage from the hallway, subpoenaed by Eleanor Prescott, showed his brutal treatment of Beatrice, as well as his horrific use of racial slurs when bragging to a fellow deputy about throwing the arrogant lady out. Brennan was convicted of felony deprivation of rights under color of law and sentenced to 4 years in a federal penitentiary. The man who had taken such joy in locking people in cages was finally placed in one himself. Jamal Jenkins, the young man whose case had sparked the immediate confrontation, had kept his job at the auto shop, free from the crushing weight of a bogus criminal record. He was promoted to lead mechanic and was saving money to open his own garage. He never forgot the day the chief judge had fought for him. 200 miles away, in the towering glass and steel architecture of the state capitol, Honorable Beatrice Langford sat behind her massive mahogany desk. The state seal hung proudly on the wall behind her. The sun was setting over the city skyline, casting long golden shadows across the thick appellate briefs piled high on her desk. She reached up and rubbed her right bicep. The deep purplish bruise shaped like Cole Brennan's fingers had faded completely months ago, leaving behind unblemished skin. But the memory of the pain, the visceral, shocking reminder of what everyday citizens endured at the hands of corrupt authority, remained permanently etched into her soul. Her chief of staff, David Mercer, knocked softly and opened the heavy oak door. "Chief Judge," David said, holding an iPad, "I have the preliminary civil rights audit from the 14th District in Mercer County. It appears their presiding magistrate has an unusually high rate of maximum sentencing for minor drug offenses." Beatrice's eyes narrowed, the familiar righteous fire igniting in her chest. The system was vast and the darkness was stubborn, but she was the apex predator of this ecosystem, and she had a lot of hunting left to do. "David," Beatrice said softly, reaching for her worn leather satchel, "get the unmarked car ready. It seems I'm overdue for another ghost tour." She picked up her yellow legal pad and her silver fountain pen. The scales of justice were heavy, but Beatrice Langford had never been afraid of the weight. Sometimes the people who abuse their power forget that there is always someone higher up the ladder. Chief Judge Beatrice Langford proved that justice isn't just a concept written in old books. It is a living, breathing force that will crush those who weaponize the law against the innocent. Her incognito takedown of a corrupt judge and a racist deputy stands as a powerful reminder that true authority requires neither a loud voice nor a badge, just the courage to stand unyielding in the face of prejudice.